Welcome back to At One Insight World, your go-to channel for geopolitics insights. Today, we're diving into the new map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations by Daniel Yergin, a groundbreaking exploration of how energy shapes our world, published in 2020. In 2025, as oil prices spike, climate pressures mount, and tensions in the Middle East boil, this book is a vital guide to understanding the forces driving global power. Daniel Yergin, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and energy expert, maps out how oil, gas, renewables, and climate change are redrawing the geopolitical landscape, from Iran's oil fields to China's solar farms. In this audiobook summary, we'll uncover the new energy map, its impact on the Middle East, and what it means for the future of nations. Let's embark on this journey together and explore the forces shaping our world. Let's start with the big picture. Yergin's The New Map argues that energy is the backbone of geopolitics. For centuries, control over resources like oil and gas has defined who rises and who falls. In 2025, this is truer than ever. The world is at a crossroads. Traditional fossil fuels still dominate, but the push for renewables, driven by climate change, is reshaping economies. Yergin begins with the shale revolution, which transformed the U.S. into the world's top oil producer by 2018. This shift, which we touched on the end of the world, is just the beginning, weakened OPEC's grip and gave America new leverage. But it also sparked tensions, especially in the Middle East, where countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran rely on oil revenue to fund their regimes. Yergin explains that the shale boom flooded markets, driving down prices and forcing OPEC nations to rethink their strategies. The Middle East, a region we've explored extensively on At One Insight World, remains the heart of global energy. Yergin details how Saudi Arabia, the world's oil kingpin, has struggled to adapt. In 2014, Saudi Arabia tried to crush the U.S. shale industry by flooding the market with cheap oil, but the plan backfired, hurting its own economy. By 2025, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, which aims to diversify beyond oil, is faltering, as a 2025 Foreign Affairs article notes. Meanwhile, Iran's oil exports, despite Western sanctions, have surged, thanks to China's purchases, as we discussed in 100-Year Marathon. Yergin argues that the Middle East's oil dominance is waning, but its strategic choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz, which we covered in Prisoners of Geography, still give it outsized influence. The question is, how will these nations navigate a world where energy is shifting from oil to renewables? Yergin also introduces the climate factor. The push for net zero emissions by 2050 is reshaping energy markets. Europe's Green Deal and China's massive investments in solar and wind, $600 billion in 2024 alone, per a Bloomberg report, are accelerating this transition. But the shift isn't smooth. Developing nations, including those in the Middle East, face a dilemma: invest in renewables or double down on oil to survive economically. Yergin's insight is that energy transitions create winners and losers, and the Middle East is ground zero for this clash. For example, Iraq, with its vast oil reserves, struggles to fund infrastructure as global demand wavers. This dynamic sets the stage for the new map, a world where energy, climate, and geopolitics collide. Now, let's focus on the Middle East, where energy and geopolitics are inseparable. Yergin dedicates significant attention to this region, and for good reason. It's home to 48% of the world's proven oil reserves. In Prisoners of Geography, we saw how the Strait of Hormuz makes Iran a geopolitical powerhouse. In the new map, Yergin explains how Iran uses this choke point to wield influence. Despite U.S. sanctions, Iran exported 1.5 million barrels of oil per day in 2024, mostly to China, according to a Reuters report. This partnership, which we explored in 100-Year Marathon, strengthens Iran's economy and fuels its nuclear ambitions, a topic we've covered in our discussions of U.S.-Iran tensions. Yergin argues that Iran's ability to bypass sanctions through clandestine oil sales and cyber warfare, like the 2012 Shamoon attack on Saudi Aramco, discussed in Dark Territory, makes it a wild card in the energy game. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, is at a turning point. Yergin details how the kingdom's oil dominance has been challenged by the U.S. shale boom and the global shift to renewables. In 2025, Saudi Arabia faces a double bind. Oil prices are volatile, with Brent crude hitting $90 per barrel in March 2025, per ex-post from a Bloomberg, but long-term demand is uncertain as countries like China push for electric vehicles. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, which includes projects like NEOM, relies on oil revenue, but a 2025 size report warns that cyber vulnerabilities linked to Chinese tech, as we discussed in Battlefield Cyber, threaten these ambitions. Yergin's insight is that Saudi Arabia must diversify or risk decline. A theme that echoes the end of the world is just the beginning as predictions about the Middle East's economic struggles. Israel, though not an oil giant, plays a unique role. Yergin notes that Israel's natural gas discoveries in the Mediterranean, like the Leviathan field, have made it an energy exporter since 2019. This strengthens Israel's economy and reduces its reliance on foreign energy, a point we touched on in Prisoners of Geography when discussing its lack of geographic depth. But Yergin warns that Israel's energy infrastructure is a cyber target. Iran's 2024 ransomware attacks on Israeli utilities, reported by CrowdStrike, highlight this risk. Israel's response, led by Unit 8200, includes preemptive cyber attacks, as we saw in Dark Territory. Yergin's broader point is that energy security in the Middle East is now as much about cyber defense as pipelines, a dynamic that shapes the region's future. Iraq, another key player, illustrates the region's challenges. Yergin explains that Iraq's oil wealth, 145 billion barrels in reserves, can make it a powerhouse, but corruption and conflict hold it back. In 2025, Iraq struggles to rebuild after decades of war. As a Jerusalem Post article notes, its reliance on oil makes it vulnerable to market swings and cyber attacks, like those from Iran-backed groups. Yergin argues that Iraq's instability could destabilize the entire region, especially if global energy transitions reduce demand. This ties back to our The End of the World video, where Iraq's flat plains were a geopolitical liability. The Middle East's energy map, Yergin shows, is a battleground where oil, power, and survival collide. Let's zoom out to the global stage. Yergin argues that energy is a key driver of superpower rivalry. The U.S., thanks to shale, has regained energy independence, but its global influence is challenged by China and Russia. China, as we discussed in 100-Year Marathon, is securing energy through the Belt and Road Initiative. Yergin details how China's $10 billion oil deals with Iran in 2024, reported by Foreign Affairs, ensure a steady supply while countering U.S. sanctions. China's push for renewables, leading the world with 40% of global solar capacity in 2025 per a Bloomberg report, also gives it leverage. But Yergin warns that China's energy hunger makes it vulnerable to disruptions, like a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, a scenario we explored in Prisoners of Geography. Russia, meanwhile, uses energy as a weapon. Yergin explains how Russia's control of Europe's gas supply, 30% of EU gas in 2024 per ex-post from an Atlantic Council, gives it geopolitical clout. But the Ukraine war, ongoing in 2025, has disrupted this. Europe's shift to renewables and LNG imports, as Yergin notes, is reducing Russia's leverage. This echoes the end of the world is just the beginning, where Zehan predicted Russia's decline due to energy market shifts. Russia's cyber attacks on energy grids, discussed in Dark Territory, further complicate the picture. Yergin's insight is that energy is a double-edged sword. It empowers nations but exposes them to new risks. The climate crisis adds another layer. Yergin argues that the push for net zero emissions is reshaping geopolitics. Europe's Green Deal, aiming for 55% emissions cuts by 2030, is forcing oil-dependent nations like Saudi Arabia to adapt. Meanwhile, developing nations, including Iraq and Iran, face pressure to transition while relying on fossil fuels. A 2025 Foreign Affairs article notes that climate policies could destabilize oil economies, creating new conflicts. Yergin's point is that the energy transition is a geopolitical earthquake, shifting power from traditional oil giants to nations mastering renewables, like China and the EU. Now, let's explore how climate and technology are reshaping the energy map, especially in the Middle East. Yergin emphasizes that climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's driving policy and conflict. In the Middle East, rising temperatures and water scarcity are destabilizing. A 2025 size report warns that Iraq could face 20% less water by 2030, threatening agriculture and oil production. Iran, too, faces protests over water shortages, as ex post from its CFR note. Yergin argues that these pressures push countries toward renewables, but the transition is rocky. Saudi Arabia's solar projects, part of Vision 2030, aim to produce 50% of its energy from renewables by 2030, but cyber vulnerabilities, as we discussed in Battlefield Cyber, threaten progress. Technology is another game changer. Yergin details how innovations like electric vehicles, EVs, and smart grids are reducing oil demand. China, with 60% of global EV sales in 2024 per Bloomberg, is leading this shift. In the Middle East, this threatens oil economies. Yergin notes that Saudi Arabia and Iran are investing in hydrogen and solar, but their infrastructure lags. Meanwhile, Israel's tech sector is pioneering energy-efficient systems, like AI-driven grids, but faces cyber risks from Iran, as we saw in Dark Territory. Yergin's insight is that technology can empower nations, but also expose them to new threats, especially in a region as volatile as the Middle East. The interplay of energy and geopolitics also involves cyber warfare. Yergin highlights how energy infrastructure, like pipelines and refineries, is a prime target. Iran's 2012 Shamoon attack on Saudi Aramco, covered in Dark Territory, was just the start. In 2025, Iran-backed hackers targeted UAE oil facilities, per a Jerusalem Post report, aiming to disrupt exports. Yergin argues that securing energy systems requires cyber resilience, a challenge for Middle East nations reliant on foreign tech, like China's 5G networks. This ties to 100-year marathon, where China's tech dominance raised espionage fears. The Middle East, Yergin shows, is a testing ground for these new energy and cyber dynamics. What does the future hold? Yergin warns that the new energy map is a clash of nations, where winners and losers will be determined by their ability to adapt. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran face existential challenges: diversify or decline. Israel, with its gas fields and tech prowess, could thrive, but cyber threats loom. A 2025 Foreign Affairs article suggests that a U.S.-Iran conflict over the Strait of Hormuz could spike oil prices, destabilizing the region. Yergin's solutions include investing in energy innovation, securing critical infrastructure, and fostering global cooperation on climate and cyber threats. But in 2025, with U.S.-China tensions and Russia's aggression, such cooperation is elusive, as ex post from an Atlantic Council note. Yergin's broader vision is a world where energy and climate redefine power. The U.S. must balance its shale advantage with renewable investments. China's renewable lead gives it an edge, but its oil dependency is a weakness. In the Middle East, the transition could empower nations like Israel while weakening oil giants like Iraq. Yergin's question is, who will shape the new map? This echoes our The End of the World video, where Zehan asked how nations will fare in a fractured world. The answer depends on energy, technology, and resilience. Let's wrap up. The New Map by Daniel Yergin is a wake-up call about the energy revolution reshaping geopolitics. From Iran's oil defiance to Saudi Arabia's diversification struggles and Israel's cyber energy edge, the Middle East is at the heart of this clash. Thanks for joining us on At One Insight World for this audiobook summary. If this opened your eyes, grab a copy of the new map to dive deeper. What do you think? How will your country navigate this new energy map? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more geopolitics insights. Stay curious,